Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quake Match gameplay. This time around we are on the Spice Dunes playing as the Indomitable Dawi against the forces of the Empire. And for this build I wanted to go with something extra wide, extra DACA oriented, and so I did. I think the Dwarves have a lot of ways they can approach this matchup. I think it is a bit more favored towards the Dawi. But there are definitely a few gimmicks Empire has up its sleeve, and one of them is to just go super wide with shooting and sort of overwhelm your opponent with mass firepower, which is kind of funny. But the Dwarves, because they have to invest in some defenses against Cav and whatnot, they often don't have the tools they need to outshoot the Empire. So for this build, I wanted to kind of strike a balance. For my Lord, I decided to run with the Rune Lord. I honestly think he's the best way to go. He's just a cost-effective Lord. On his toilet seat, he gives you plus 15% magic resist, which means that he himself has 55% magic resist, but his whole army has 40% magic resist. Pretty useful. A lot of Empire troops, or a lot of Empire builds, rely on units with, or rely on some amount of magic damage, especially from people like Balthazar over here. So definitely that's nifty. He also does have Master of Wrath and Ruin to slow and control cavalry, and also otherwise just whittle down units like greatswords. Master of Negation for that protection, and then Master of Greening, because missile resistance I think is useful. For the rest of the build, well, we're going super wide, so we actually haven't even brought Slayers. Our front line here is a mix of Dwarf Warriors, a single unit of Longbeards anchoring things in the center, and then we do have, the rest of this is just miners with Blasting Charge. You can see they're scattered around. We do have 5 units of them. Miners with Blasting Charge will even do good damage to Greatswords with their volley of explosives. And they do have some AP, once again, decent, even against Greatswords in that sense. And they can definitely hold up lower-end Empire chaff and really blow them to Kingdom Come with those satchel charges. Alongside them, we do have 2 units of Longbeards with great weapons, a bit of a anti-armor reserve. If my opponent did sort of break through with greatswords, these guys can do some damage. Obviously, Longbeard's not the most amazing great weapon unit ever. One of the weaker ones, if anything, at least against other great weapons. But still, they'll hold up rather well. On the firing front, 2 cannons are present. These guys will dominate most, if not all, artillery duels, unless my opponent goes like super cannon heavy. And they'll give you some great tools against cavalry, some okay tools against infantry and single targets, and just all in all, good all-around unit. 2 units of Iron Drakes control armored torpedoes. These guys will annihilate elite infantry like great swords, and obviously will completely dumpster cavalry. So if my opponent brings Demigryph, Strikes Guard, Empire Knights, any of that sort, they'll do great. And then 3 units of Thunderers, providing me with some AP. And immediately the cannons are going to start teeing off. Unfortunately, one kind of wasting the shots here in Balthazar. I had him on free fire. But, though I actually think I might have ordered him to, I forget, I think I might have ordered him to attack Balthazar there. But one of them does fire a volley into the greatswords, and, you know, 6 models off. Not bad. It's nice. For my opponent's build, he did go with a pretty, I think, standard Empire counter, except for the Warrior Priests, who are an interesting addition. If we go over the build, 5 units of greatswords make up the front line. They are backed by 2 Warrior Priests, which should give a full coverage of the line if my opponent was able to engage in a straight line. And they do have the Hammer of Sigmar and Shield of Faith, both solid buffs. The problem is that the Warrior Priests are a pretty expensive hero unit, and they're not all that good in combat, so I feel like you're paying a lot for just those buffs. So I'm not the biggest fan of them in this matchup especially, because they're not that good against dwarves. In the second line, we do have, well, Empire Knights as a bit of a flanking tool, and then 4 units of handguns as well as the silver bullets in the center. So a whole bunch of AP firepower, and they are all backed by Balthazar Gelt, who is over here. He does have the Staff of Alans as well as Arcane Conduit, giving him boatloads of winds of magic. Transmutation of Lead, which is a nice melee attack debuff. Once again, I don't really think it's worth against dwarves, because you're not too dependent on stopping dwarf melee attacks, in my opinion. It's usually the shooting that's the problem. Final Transmutation, Plague of Rust, and Searing Doom. Plague of Rust synergizing nicely with the Empire Knights, for sure. Searing Doom, I don't think, once again, another ability that I don't think is that useful against the Dawi, but we'll see how it works out. In the meantime, another cannon volley does take down a few handgunners. Not really having the greatest targets here, and figuring that if these greatswords push into close quarters, we're going to be able to gun them down pretty efficiently. Same with the knights. We're actually going to start firing away at my opponent's handguns shortly with our cannons. And the knights here, my opponent, smart move here, taking advantage of the dunes to evade fire. And you can see those broadside shots on the handguns, those strung out like that, wiping out like 12 models, or maybe it was like 8, but still a huge amount of damage done here on these handguns. From the cannons getting broadside shots, and you can see this unit now coming under more fire and more hate from the Dawi, and losing models, so we're getting some good value there. The cannons obviously lacking ideal targets. Empire Knight's a very cheap target. Great swords and spaghetti lines, not going to get many kills. But you know, every little bit counts. And in the meantime, you can see these handguns down to 46 models. So in the little time my opponent tried to flex and shift his line, we did a huge amounts of damage. Now these greatswords are going to attempt to close, and they're immediately going to come under some withering thunder fire, because our thunders are just having none of that. And we are going to start countercharging with our Dwarf Warriors, looking to tie down these troops. And you can see those Troll Hammers coming in on these greatswords and immediately just dumpstering them, taking off a lot of HP, like 1,000 HP taken off there. And that's against the suboptimal target, so definitely getting a lot of value. And the Warrior Priest charging through, but my opponent not popping his buffs immediately, at least, which is a bit of a mistake, though he does manage to bait out the satchel charges on these guys. Taking an overarching look, you can see the I'm trying to say thunders for some reason, but the handgunners are unloading on the Iron Drakes. And so what we're going to do is charge out with our Dwarf Warriors and look to zone them away, because my opponent did sort of shift his line over here, looking to force a breach on one flank, which is not a bad idea. We are going to countercharge here with the Dwarf Warriors, start applying pressure to that line, and try to save our Iron Drake, because we don't want to lose this unit. They are still very valuable. In the meantime, though, you can see the Greatswords here buckling under pressure, forced to rout. Hammer of Sigmar does go down, but at this point, you can see the Rune Lord here crushing the Warrior Priest underneath his mighty hammer, and I guess it doesn't look that fancy. It's not that big of a hammer, but whatever, he tries. Over here, the Empire Knights do charge into the Miners' blasting charges. You can see the satchel charges being flung in, but the Cannonball is getting huge value against the Empire Knights, and now there's a Crossfire coming in from over here as well. The cannon just pouring in, and over here the Miners are getting an intercept on the poor Empire Knights, who are also coming under fire from the Thunders. So just a terrifying crossfire from all directions from the Empire batteries. And of course, the Iron Drakes with Troll Hammers are just going to annihilate Empire Knights in every volley. They're going to take like half the unit's HP. Final Transmutation does go down here, and it's going to be taking off models perhaps on the Longbeards, but really nothing impressive. And against the Rune Lord, it did almost nothing because he's got that magic resist. Elsewhere, the Miners are trying to buy time against the Greatswords, which is valuable. And the Cannons, in the meantime, staying online, and we've breached the front line, gotten in with these Longbeards on the Silver Bullets. Silver Bullets, unfortunately, they're a strong unit in this matchup, I actually think. But when your opponent brings a Rune Lord, they definitely lose a lot of their effectiveness, because you're losing 40% of your damage output to that magic resistance, which is definitely a bit rough. In the meantime, though, the Dwarf Warriors swarming the handguns, and my opponent not really paying attention, so he's actually getting overwhelmed there. He does try to bombard my Thunders here, but like I said, Seeing Doom not doing very much, especially with that magic resistant mix. And we are going to be able to rout these Greatswords, and suddenly everything is falling apart. Over here, the Miners pursuing the Knights off the field. Over here, rallying Dwarf Warriors coming back into the fray. Greatswords being overwhelmed by mass fire. And my opponent does still have some troops. He's got these Greatswords over here. He's got these Greatswords over here. Very healthy, a few healthy units of handguns. But the problem is that at this point they're going to be coming in piecemeal. There is still this very healthy firing line over here of these Thunders, and most of my shooting, in fact, is over on this flank at this point, not over here. Only the cannon's still there. So although my opponent is going to be able to shut some stuff down, he's now getting crossfired. His Warrior Priest getting poured, just completely having fire poured on him, and he's just falling apart under that pressure. Really not able to hold here, routes and flees. And we are now pouring in more reserves into the fray here, pushing in with our Longbeards with great weapons to save the cannon crew. And still, so much firepower. Like, let's look at these units. Iron Drakes still on 21 models. Iron Drakes, of course, are on 21 models. All these Thunders almost at full or at full HP, and with very few model losses. We still have a cannon online with half its ammo. And my opponent at this point, he's reduced to just these few pockets, and they're just way out of position. And one of the things against Dawi you don't really want doing is trickle and piecemeal. You really need to hit the Dawi all at once to swamp their defenses. But my opponent no longer really has the tools for that. So over here, another Final Transmutation going down on the Rune Lord. Guys, this is a bit of a lesson, I think, on what not to do against Rune Lords. Don't try to snipe them with Final Transmutation. It's not going to work. At least when they're on their toilet seat. And in the meantime, the Warrior Priest getting overwhelmed by Thunder Fire. These Greatswords bogged down in the fight with the buffs coming in from the Master Rune of Negation. We're going to be able to tank through these Greatswords just okay. And still pouring through. We still have a healthy unit of Miners over there. Okay unit of Miners there. Dwarf Warriors and some Longbeards and just a whole slew of units still pushing in. Hordes of shooting. And at this point, it is going to be GG as the Empire's forces are simply going to buckle under all this pressure. Master of Wrath and Ruin here going in against the Greatswords, really pulverizing the poor guys. They just don't stand a chance. And they are trying to close in, but it's too little, too late. Just that constant fire from the Iron Drakes and Thunderers is going to break them and force a rout. So the gun box holds strong, and I think Dawi definitely have the edge in this matchup. But there were a few things I think my opponent did a bit wrong that I do want to break down here. But yeah, gun boxes in general with Dawi, you don't necessarily need Slayers. I know a lot of people love to use Slayers, but You don't need them necessarily. They're an expensive unit. When push comes to shove, they do cost 900 gold. For their cost, you can almost put 3 units of miners on the field. Or you can put 2 dwarf warriors on the field, which potentially can give you more zoning. Do keep in mind that slayers are quick by dwarf standards, but that doesn't mean very much compared to cavalry. It's still only 40 speed. So most cavalry will easily outmaneuver you, and all cavalry will outmaneuver you to an extent. So slayers, and plus they don't have AP. So against higher end, like certainly they have a decent. It's like 33% of their damage is AP, but compared to something like Empire Knights, even much less Reichsguard with their 120 armor or Demigods with 125, normal slayers are not going to do that much damage. Not quickly at any rate. So that also reduces their efficiency, I think, and. In that situation, I do like the mass DACA. It gives you more coverage against mass handguns. This is not quite the most you could do. You could bring Sterling's Revenge and a few more. I think you can bring 6 handguns total. So plus the Silver Bullets and Sterling's Revenge. So you can get a lot of AP shooting on the field. Potentially with Outriders even more. But I think that this sort of build gives you some zoning against that. The Iron Drakes, of course, performing admirably against both the Knights and the Greatswords. Do keep in mind they also do explosive damage, which does hurt nearby greatswords as well, which is nice. You can hit blobs and really mulch through multiple units. The Thunders, you know, did a good job. Not necessarily the most kills on some of these units, but they did melt through those troops. And, you know, front line, it held. It did its job. It zoned my opponent away and held the line as long as possible. Cannons, also surprising value. If your opponent turns broadside to you like that, you can get some huge damage output in, and it's pretty potent. For my opponent's build here, and this is where I think there were a few mistakes made. One, the Warrior Priest. Now, it might seem like a cool idea to go with super wide with Warrior Priest, but the Warrior Priest, even the way he brought them in here, if we look at his build to an extent, we could see that each of those Warrior Priests, they cost 1,000 baseline. Now we strip off all the stuff he didn't bring, and you still got a 600. You're still paying 1,200 gold for what is essentially just a buff battery. Perhaps that's worth it. I guess I expect it to cost a bit more. They don't, which is nice. But I'm not really sure it's worth it. I think that for 600 gold, you'd be better or for 1,200 gold, you'd be better served bring like 3 units of swordsmen to get a little more width. Especially because my opponent wasn't really looking to do sort of a heal blob here with like Earthblood or anything like that. So I do think that you'd be better served bringing, say, 3 units of swordsmen, get that extra width, get that surround, upgrade your knights to Reichsguard, because there is a huge gap in capability between knights and Reichsguard. Or something along those lines, basically. I do think there's just better investments for your gold. And then Balthazar. Now, I have used Balthazar myself, but Final Transmutation, very unreliable in this matchup because the Dwarfs can, of course, bring the Locus of Power and Rune Lord. Transmutation of Lead, not really useful. I do think the only spell... Balthazar doesn't have too many great spells in this matchup, in my opinion. Plague of Rust is good if you're going with lots of non-AP. And Glittering Robe is not bad. But that's about it. I really don't think Balthazar is the way to go. I honestly think that if you want to go with a more solid Lord squad, I think that's really where my opponent's build fell apart, is Lord composition or the hero composition. I think you're better off with like Karl Franz and a Jade Wizard. Karl gives you some AP, he gives you some great buffs, just like the ones you're getting off those Warrior Priests. Not quite to this, perhaps, well, actually to a better level with Reikland Runefang. You don't have to bring Galmaraz, though it can help you crump units like Rune Lords. But he does get stand your ground, he does have hold the line, he does have the Reikland Runefang, so you get all these AoE buffs, you're able to roid up your front line, and get some huge value there. And then you get a Jade Wizard, you can throw on a horse, strip down of almost everything. You could go with, like, you don't even need Regrowth if you're not going super elite. Maybe you want it for Karl. Go with something like that. You've got basically a comparable front line to what, or a hero squad to what my opponent brought, but perhaps a bit cheaper. And you've got some better, I think, tools for the matchup. Otherwise, not a bad build for my opponent, I think. Greatsword's really your only great infantry tool in this matchup, so unfortunately, that's kind of what you're stuck with. Handguns are good. You can mass them even more. And Empire Knights, bit of a cheap, crappy cav, but honestly, for budget, they'll do okay. And like I said, with 110 armor, they'll hold up even okay against Slayers. But regardless, well played to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it entertaining and fun to watch. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe and share and all that good stuff. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, as usual, don't hesitate to post them down below, and I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.